The Franklin Community Center buzzed with warmth and conversation on a crisp autumn evening. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pastries drifted through the air, mingling with the quiet hum of neighbors exchanging stories. It was the kind of gathering where people still greeted each other by name, where life moved at a gentler pace, allowing for genuine connection. Karoline Leavitt stood near a table stacked with pamphlets, smiling as she shook hands and engaged in conversations. She had always enjoyed events like these, not for the attention but for the real, unfiltered moments people shared with her. She found meaning in the quiet honesty of their words, in the way people opened up about their struggles and triumphs. It reminded her why she did what she did. As she spoke with an elderly woman about the local school system, she felt a small but persistent tug on her sleeve. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming it was just the gentle pull of movement in the crowded space. But then it came again, deliberate, hesitant. She turned and looked down. A little girl, no older than 7, stood before her. She had chestnut curls that framed a round, freckled face and wide brown eyes filled with an innocence that only childhood could hold. Her small hands clutched the hem of a faded floral dress, as if grounding herself before speaking. Karoline crouched down to meet the child at eye level, offering her a warm smile. "Hey there," she said gently. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, shifting on her feet before answering in a quiet voice. "Jessica." "Well, it's nice to meet you, Jessica," Karoline responded warmly. But Jessica didn't look away or shyly retreat, as children often did. Instead, her eyes remained locked on the delicate gold cross that rested against Karoline's collarbone. After a moment, she raised a small, trembling finger and pointed at it. "What does your necklace mean?" she asked. The noise around them didn't stop, but for Karoline, the air shifted. It was a simple question, innocent even, yet it carried a weight she hadn't expected. That cross had been with her for years, a quiet constant in her life. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a marker of something bigger, something deeply personal. And now, for the first time in a long time, someone was asking her to explain it. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, her mind pulled her backward, to a night she had spent years trying to forget. Karoline's breath hitched as Jessica's question pulled her back to a night she had spent years trying to forget. The warmth of the community center faded, replaced by the cold, sterile light of her college dorm room, the glow of her laptop screen, the only thing illuminating the space. It had been late, past midnight, when her phone vibrated on the desk beside her. She almost ignored it, too exhausted from studying for an exam she wasn't sure she'd pass. But some quiet instinct urged her to pick it up. The moment she heard her mother's voice, she knew. Her grandmother, Karoline Leavitt, the woman who had taught her how to knead biscuit dough just right, who always smelled like lavender and spoke about faith as if it were as real as the ground beneath their feet, was gone. A sudden heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. Karoline barely remembered what happened next. She only recalled the suffocating weight in her chest, the way her roommate whispered, "I'm so sorry," as she sat frozen, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She couldn't cry. She couldn't move. Somehow she booked a bus ticket home. Somehow she packed a bag. But every action felt detached, as if she were watching someone else go through the motions. When she stepped into her childhood home, everything was wrong. The air was thick, heavy with loss. Her grandmother's chair sat empty in the corner of the living room, a faded quilt draped over the armrest, untouched. Karoline's mother had tried to be strong, offering her a weak smile through tear-rimmed eyes, but the grief sat between them like an unspoken truth too painful to acknowledge. That night, unable to sleep, Karoline wandered into her grandmother's bedroom. The scent of lavender still lingered, clinging to the blankets and pillows. She stood in the dim light, staring at the familiar space, searching for something, anything, to make the loss feel less final. Her eyes landed on the nightstand. There, resting atop a well-worn Bible, was a delicate gold chain, its small cross pendant catching the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Her grandmother had worn that necklace every day of her life. Karoline hesitated before reaching for it, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. The weight of it in her palm felt different than she expected, heavier, as if it carried something beyond its physical form. She clenched it tightly, her breath uneven. She had always believed in God, in faith, in the comforting certainty that things happened for a reason. But in that moment, all of it felt like a lie. How could a loving God take away someone so good, so full of kindness? How could faith be real when it did nothing to stop the ache in her chest, the unbearable emptiness of knowing she would never hear her grandmother's voice again? The anger came fast, hot and sharp. Tears blurred her vision as she sank onto the bed, gripping the necklace so tightly the edges pressed into her palm. She wanted to scream, to demand answers from a silent universe. Instead, she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking, "If you're real, if you're really out there, I need to know. Because right now, I feel nothing." Silence. No voice from the heavens, no sudden wave of peace. Just the faint hum of crickets outside the window and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She should have let go of the necklace, wiped her face and told herself to move on. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed there, waiting. And then, something happened. Her heart, which had felt like it was tearing itself apart moments before, slowed. The crushing weight in her chest didn't disappear, but it loosened just enough for her to breathe. And somewhere deep inside, where only she could feel it, a whisper of warmth settled into the coldest parts of her. It wasn't the clarity she had begged for. It wasn't a reason, a solution, or the certainty she had lost. But it was something, and for the first time since she had picked up the phone that night, she wasn't drowning. She pulled the necklace between her fingers, staring at it through tear-streaked lashes. It had belonged to her grandmother, but somehow it felt as though it had found her instead. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if her faith would ever feel the way it had when she was a child, simple, unquestioning, easy. But she knew one thing. She wasn't alone, and that was enough to keep going. Karoline blinked, bringing herself back to the present, to the small, expectant face looking up at her. Jessica's wide brown eyes remained fixed on the delicate gold cross resting against Karoline's collarbone. Her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, as if bracing herself for an answer. Karoline took a slow breath, steadying herself. She had lived through her own storm, had walked through the aching loneliness of loss, and now, standing before her, was a little girl unknowingly carrying the same weight. "This necklace," Karoline finally said, her voice softer than before, "belonged to my grandmother. She wore it every single day, and when she passed, it became something more than just jewelry to me. It reminded me that even when I felt alone, I never really was." Jessica's eyes flickered with something, a quiet understanding far beyond her years. For a long moment she didn't say anything, just reached up hesitantly to touch her own bare collarbone. Karoline noticed the way her small fingers brushed against the skin there, almost as if she were searching for something that should have been there, but wasn't. "My mom used to wear one," Jessica whispered finally. The way she said it, the slight tremble in her voice, the way her fingers curled into a fist, made Karoline's chest tighten. Jessica lowered her gaze, staring at the floor. "She had to sell it," she admitted, her voice barely above a breath. "We needed food more than jewelry." Karoline felt something crack deep inside her. The weight of those words, so simple yet so heavy, settled over her like a stone. She didn't need to ask where Jessica's mother was now. She could already hear the answer in the way the little girl's voice wavered, in the quiet resignation of someone far too young to understand the unfairness of life, but old enough to feel it. Karoline's heart ached. She knew that kind of pain, the feeling of losing something that had once been an anchor, of being forced to move forward when all you wanted to do was hold on. She had been there, drowning in loss, clutching a cross that had once belonged to someone she loved. And now here was Jessica, holding on to nothing but the memory of what had been taken from her. Without hesitation, Karoline reached behind her neck, unclasping the delicate gold chain. The small cross slipped into her palm, warm from where it had rested against her skin. Jessica's eyes widened as Karoline gently took her hand and placed the necklace in her small palm. "It's yours now," Karoline said softly. Jessica stared at it, her lip trembling. "But I can't," she said, shaking her head. "Yes, you can," Karoline said gently, wrapping her hands around the little girl's. "And whenever you wear it, I want you to remember that no matter what happens, you are never alone." The first tear slipped down Jessica's cheek, silent and unbidden, then another and another. And then, in a sudden, unexpected motion, Jessica stepped forward and threw her arms around Karoline's neck. Karoline froze for a moment, startled by the raw, unguarded emotion of it. Then she wrapped her arms around the little girl, holding her close as Jessica's small frame shook against her. Somewhere in the background, a murmur of voices had quieted. The weight of the moment settled over the room, thick with something unspoken, something sacred. Karoline could feel Jessica's quiet sobs against her shoulder, feel the way the little girl clung to her as if she were afraid to let go. And Karoline held her, not saying anything, because she knew there were no words that could make the pain disappear. But sometimes words weren't what was needed. Sometimes just being there, just holding on, was enough. Finally, Jessica pulled away, wiping at her damp cheeks with the back of her hand. She looked down at the necklace in her palm, her fingers closing around it as if she were afraid it might slip away. For the first time since she had spoken, she smiled. Small, hesitant, but real. Karoline felt her own throat tighten. This little girl had lost something she couldn't get back, but maybe, just maybe, she had gained something new, a reminder that even in the hardest moments, even when everything felt uncertain, she wasn't alone. And in that moment, Karoline realized something else. Neither was she. Karoline took a step back, watching as Jessica stared down at the delicate gold cross resting in her small palm. The little girl's fingers curled protectively around it, as if she were afraid it might disappear. Her eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, flickered with something Karoline recognized, something fragile but powerful. Hope. A quiet sniffle came from behind Jessica, and Karoline glanced up to see a man standing a few feet away. His hands were trembling slightly, his eyes filled with emotion as they darted between his daughter and the necklace she now held. Jessica turned to him, holding up the cross as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "she gave it to me." The man, Daniel, Karoline realized, took a shaky breath and knelt beside his daughter. His work-worn hands rested on her small shoulders as he looked at Karoline, his expression filled with both gratitude and hesitation. "I don't know how to thank you," he said softly, his voice raw. "You didn't have to do that." Karoline smiled gently. "I wanted to," she said. "It's not just a necklace. It's a reminder. One that helped me when I needed it most, and now, maybe, it can do the same for Jessica." Daniel swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to hold back tears. He looked down at his daughter, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Your mom used to say, faith isn't about what you can see," he murmured. "It's about knowing you're not alone, even when it feels like you are." Jessica nodded, her fingers tightening around the necklace. "Now I have a reminder, just like Mommy did." The air in the room felt different now, thicker with emotion, heavier with something unspoken. The murmurs of the gathered crowd had quieted, and as Karoline glanced around, she saw the expressions on the faces of those watching. Some were touched, others reflective. And then something unexpected happened. A man in the back of the room, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with graying hair and a tired but kind face, stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wad of cash, pressing it gently into Daniel's hand. "For groceries," he said simply. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. "Oh, I can't take this." "Please," the man interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "It's not charity. It's just the right thing to do." Daniel hesitated, then looked down at Jessica, who was still holding the necklace to her chest, as if it were the most valuable thing she owned. Slowly he nodded, his fingers closing around the cash. That was all it took. A woman near the front, an elderly lady with soft silver hair and kind eyes, reached into her purse and pulled out a grocery store gift card, stepping forward to place it in Daniel's free hand. A younger woman beside her unfastened a small silver bracelet from her wrist and knelt in front of Jessica, holding it out with a gentle smile. "Something pretty to go with your new necklace," she said softly. Jessica looked up at her father for permission, and when Daniel gave a small nod, she hesitantly took the bracelet, her eyes wide with disbelief. One by one, people began stepping forward, offering small gestures of kindness. A few dollars, a warm handshake, a whispered word of encouragement. It wasn't much, not in the grand scheme of things, but together these small acts became something bigger than any one person in the room. A community, a family. Karoline watched it unfold, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had stepped into this room expecting nothing more than polite conversation, a few handshakes, maybe some exchanged smiles. She had not expected this, a ripple of kindness sparked by a single moment, growing into something far greater than she had imagined. She took a step back, letting the moment belong to the people around her. This wasn't about her anymore, it never had been. It was about something larger, something that had started with a simple question from a little girl. And now it had become something that would linger long after this evening ended. Because sometimes faith isn't just about belief. Sometimes it's about action, about showing up when someone else is too lost to find their way. And sometimes kindness doesn't just change the person receiving it, it changes everyone who witnesses it. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, Karoline stood in place for a moment, simply watching. Jessica clutched the necklace tightly against her chest, her small fingers curled protectively around it. Her father, Daniel, stood beside her, his eyes still filled with emotion as he exchanged quiet words of gratitude with those who had stepped forward. The motherly woman who had given Jessica the bracelet patted her head gently before walking away, while the man who had offered the first donation gave Daniel a firm nod of encouragement. This was more than just an exchange of kindness. It was a reminder of what faith, love, and community could do. A reminder that no one should have to face their struggles alone. Karoline exhaled, feeling a warmth settle deep in her chest. She glanced down at the place where her necklace had rested just hours ago. It was gone, but she didn't feel its absence. Instead, she felt fuller, more whole than she had in a long time. Faith, she realized, wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't about certainty or about never questioning. It was about trust. About believing that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found. Sometimes in unexpected places, sometimes in the kindness of a stranger, and sometimes in the smallest hand tugging at your sleeve. She turned toward the door, stepping out into the cool evening air. The sky above was a canvas of deep blues and soft oranges, the first stars flickering to life. As she walked toward her car, she heard a small voice behind her. "Miss Karoline?" She turned to see Jessica standing there, her fingers still wrapped around the necklace. "I think my dad's right," the little girl said softly. "You gave me more than a necklace." Karoline smiled, crouching down one last time. "And you gave me more than a question." Jessica beamed, then turned, running back to her father. Karoline watched them go, knowing she might never see them again, but also knowing that this moment would stay with them forever, and if she was honest, it would stay with her too. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a kind word, a simple gift, a moment of understanding, can change a life. So the next time you have the chance to show kindness, take it. You never know whose heart might need it the most. If this story touched you in any way, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, pass it on, and let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment below and tell us, has a small act of kindness ever changed your life?